welcome to this week's theme, which is going to be covering learning. Within this first session, we're going to look at what is learning, looking at some of the learning theories, and also then look at the key stages of learning. We're going to look at it from the child's perspective, but we're also going to then focus on how that impacts as a coach and also as an athlete in terms of skill development. Today, this week's kind of session will lead nicely into next week, where we're going to focus on motor development and motor programming, which obviously kind of link really well together with this learning theme. So first of all, what is learning? According to the Oxford Dictionary, the acquisition of knowledge or skills through study, experience or being taught. Obviously we've all experienced some sort of learning, from whether it's being a small child, learning how to crawl and learning how to walk, so those motor skills, fine and gross. Then moving on to things like learning how to read and write as we get into infant and elementary age development, right through up until, throughout school and then every day that we're often learning new and different things. And this is obviously experienced through the educational environment, but actually being taught and experiencing things for ourselves. Another definition by Kolb, 1984, learning is the process by which knowledge is created through transformation of experience. So again, very much focused on that experience element. Learning is a relatively permanent improvement in performance as a result of practice. It's not directly observable, and it is inferred from changes in performance over time. So focusing down on this, these are kind of definitions by Martins 2004. The overall kind of learning process, other things can impact it. So sometimes it's quite difficult to say as a coach if an athlete or a child has learnt a new skill. They may perform better because they've maybe matured a year since their previous season, or maybe even had a lucky day. So athletes could even perform badly because of an injury or illness or loss of concentration. This is why we say that it needs to be a relatively permanent improvement in performance. It can't be just a one-off. And that's where we can measure and understand that someone has learnt something, because of that permanent change in performance or improvement. So learning occurs when we are able to gain a mental or physical grasp of a subject. We're also able to make sense of a subject, an event or feeling, so interpreting things into our own words or actions. Using newly acquired ability or knowledge in conjunction with skills and understanding already possessed. So putting that into application, so you might have learnt as a child how to pass a ball in football and learn the basics of it, but then applying that understanding to a different scenario or a new situation, taking that knowledge into a game situation might be an example. So it's a different environment. Doing something with new knowledge or skill and taking ownership of it. Again, so we need to ensure that our learners are taking ownership of what we're doing. Now we're going to focus on some of the learning theories. There's a whole variety of these. I'm obviously not going to be able to cover all of them. I'll just go through some of the basic ideas. Obviously you can understand the process of learning and how this can be applied. So operant conditions. This is Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. Involves the correct response to a situation or task being rewarded. So being rewarded for something that you've done well. This reinforces then the correct response. So it can be through positive reinforcement, but it might be through negative reinforcement. And you may have experienced this yourself as an athlete or a player of sport, where you've been screamed and shouted at by your coach, parent, or other about a performance, and then obviously that's created a change. So it might be even through punishment. Obviously within our coaching, we're trying to ensure that we're focusing on that positive reinforcement rather than that negative and punishment approach, because obviously it could demotivate that learning process. Another method or theory of learning is trial and error. It involves testing various methods, achieving a goal until you find the one that works for you. Often we can see this in our coaching and the way that we work by different teaching methods. So we might use more of a discovery style of teaching. So we get our athletes and performers and children to actually practice and learn things for themselves. Kids will learn more from learning by their mistakes in some respects. Okay, now thirdly we're going to look at Thorndike's law. So the law of exercise. So this is rehearsing or exercising the stimulus response. Connects, basically having that stimulus response helps us connect and strengthen and reinforce the correct skill. So that kind of practice and exercise. The law of effect is a skill is followed by a pleasant reaction. This is where the stimulus response bond is further strengthened. If this following a negative reaction, then the bond may be weakened. So it's about that practice and then the response we get to that practice. The law of readiness. So this is the athlete must be both mentally and physically capable for performing a skill efficiently. So Thorndike's law obviously focuses on three key areas to make sure the athlete is ready for what we're doing. As a coach, we may be able to decide that. The athlete might set some parameters and boundaries for themselves. The law of effect, so how we give feedback and how we support that reaction. And then obviously the practices that we put in place to develop that stimulus response and that strengthening and reinforcement of a skill. The next area we're going to look at is cognitive insight learning. Also known as Gestalt theory, the performer needs to understand the whole problem before performing the skill correctly. They base their response on previous experiences and the current situation. So it's about developing that perceptual ability as used to decide on a response based on the skill level and a task ahead. So putting this into context in a sporting environment, an example of this would be possibly a high jumper performing a whole skill to enable them to decide which is the best technique for them to use. So which off foot they're going to use. So they might try the skill out using one, try the skill out using the other, and have that perceptual awareness of what that feels like and deciding which is the best option for them. And they may adjust their practice accordingly based on that trial and error of cognitive learning process. The final area we're going to look at is the experiential learning cycle. So rather than a theory, this is looking at a theory in terms of key progresses or processes of learning. So looking at the diagrams on screen here, you can see this Kolb's cycle starts off with concrete experience. So this is doing and having a go at an experience or a task. Reflecting and observation. This is reviewing, reflecting on what you've experienced. Abstract and conceptualization. So this is concluding and learning from that experience. And then active experiments. This is planning or trying out what you have done. The concrete experience might be a new experience of a situation that's encountered or reinterpretation of an existing experience. The second, reflecting of observation, again, this might be of a new experience or a particular importance of inconsistencies between experiences and understanding them. The abstract and conceptualization gives us an understanding, being able to reflect on new ideas, modify or abstract key concepts. The active experiment, the learner then applies to the world around them, might be in different situations, and obviously then looks at the results of what they've learned. So focusing on this learning cycle, what you might want to do is think about you as a coach in your delivery with children, what you do at each stage of this cycle to help develop that concrete experience, encourage reflection and observation, get them to abstract and conceptualize, and actually then get them to experiment and try things out for themselves, because that's obviously going to help with their learning process.